Good morning. I'm Dina Vandenbosch, and this is 7th grade social studies. If you're a 7th grader, then you have found the right place. If you're not a 7th grader, then stick around and we'll talk about some geography today. So, over the next few weeks, we're going to be looking at some geography standards. And the first one that we'd like to focus on is the one that says we're going to categorize the geographic organization of people, places, and environments using spatial models. Now, spatial models include things like population density patterns. We've seen those before. But before we do all that, I'd like to start with an activity that I'd like to call Where in the World. And I've fashioned this after a game show from back in the day. I think it started in the 1950s, and no, I wasn't alive then, but they revived it in the 80s, called Name That Tune. And the point of this game show was to see if the contestants could name or identify a song in as few notes as possible. So someone would say, I can name that tune in 6 notes. Once in a while, you'd see someone that says, I can name that tune in 1 note. And if they could do that, that was legendary. So let's see if you can identify a secret location that I've identified on this with as few clues as possible. We'll start with clue number 1. Clue number 1 says it's in the northern hemisphere, okay? So, if you've already guessed my secret location, then you're on my same wavelength. But chances are you haven't. But we've narrowed it down. We know that it's going to be somewhere north of the equator. Let's go to clue number 2. Clue number 2 says it's located at 55 degrees latitude. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. If you have access to a map or a globe, then you're going to find that line of latitude and you're going to follow it around to see if you can guess what Ms. Vandenbosch is thinking. Well, first of all, let's remember what latitude is. Latitude are those lines that run parallel to the equator because we know that the equator is our main line of latitude at 0 degrees. At 55 degrees latitude, that makes it about halfway between the equator and the North Pole. To give you a frame of reference, here in Mobile, we're at about 30 degrees latitude, so it's going to be more north than us. So let's find 55, it's just south of the 60 degree, and we're going to follow that around. Has anyone guessed it yet? If you think you have, you know you have to write it down because you're 7th graders and you know that no one will believe you unless there's evidence. All right, for those who haven't guessed it yet, let's go to clue number 3. Clue number 3 says that this is a major city of a Eurasian country. I bet some of you guessed. Eurasian country. That narrows it down. So now we are somewhere between Europe and Asia, and this is a major city. I can know that some of you have guessed it, but let's go to the last clue. Clue number 4 says it's the capital city of the world's largest country. And we know that the world's largest country is what? Russia. And its capital city is Moscow. So if you guessed Moscow, Russia, you are correct. Let's learn some quick facts about Moscow. And here's a beautiful image of St. Basil's Cathedral, which was a church that was built in the 1500s. Moscow is the capital city of Russia. It's home to this St. Basil's Cathedral as well as Red Square, the Kremlin, which is the residence of the Russian president, Vladimir Putin. So if you've guessed that we're probably going to be talking about Russia today, then you're on track. Today's objective is to examine the physical geography of the region of Russia and the Eurasian republics. Our essential question that we're going to try to answer today is, how does that physical geography impact life in this region? So we're going to look at some examples of that. But before we do that, I want you to think about what comes to mind when you think about Russia. What images come to mind? Perhaps you think of the flag of Russia or the Siberian tiger, maybe the flag of the former Soviet Union or the image of their current president. Well, I asked some of my students to let me know what they thought of when they think of Russia. So let's read some responses. Many of my students said, it's huge. They said, it's a large country. Stefan said it's the biggest. Kyra said it's got cold climates and it's got Siberia. Mackenzie noted the unique buildings that take place there, or that are located there. Mariah mentioned the cathedrals and the customs they have. Caitlin mentioned Vladimir Putin as their leader. Christian was thinking about how cold it was, all the snow and the other cool stuff they have in Russia. And again, Owen said, it's cold and it's huge. Carlos mentioned something to me, Russia football. Didn't know that was a thing. But then some of my students were thinking more of the history of this region. Will said the space race, the Cold War, the Soviets. Christina and Connor both mentioned communism. Ben was thinking of some of their leaders, Joseph Stalin during the Soviet Union. And then, of course, we know that Oscar gave me a whole history lesson, mentioning Vladimir Lenin and Gorbachev and Khrushchev and so on and so on. Proud of you, Oscar. But perhaps the most interesting response that I got was from Jaden. And Jaden said that Russia is big and strong. Russia is powerful. And only because I saw that girl punch down a tree. I had to think about that for a moment, but those types of responses are the reasons that I love teaching 7th grade. And by the way, Jaden, I have seen that video, and she is fierce. She's training to be a professional boxer. So now that we've kind of thought about Russia, let's get acquainted to this region. On your map, you can see that Russia, Moscow, Russia, is about 5,000 miles away from our capital of Washington, D.C. And so we want to look at this region. And of course, let's remember what the definition of a region is. It's a geographic location that has physical and cultural similarities, okay? So we've already studied during 3rd quarter some regions. We've looked at North America, Central America and the Caribbean, South America, and Europe. So over the next 5 weeks after today, we're going to be looking at the Russia and the Eurasian republics. We're going to turn to Southwest Asia and North Africa. We'll look at Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, East Asia, and then Southeast Asia. And we're going to do all that in 6 weeks, and we can do it. But let's start first with this region. As you can see, this is a political map of Russia and the Eurasian republics. We can tell that this is a political map because of all the vibrant colors. Kazakhstan is not really purple in real life, okay? So obviously, the purpose of this map is to show the areas and the borders of these countries. Let's first start with Russia in the orange. And then to the southwest of Russia, we have 3 countries that we call the Caucasus republics. You might also hear them called the Trans-Caucasus republics. And in that region, around the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, these are the 3 countries. The first one is Georgia, and no, not Georgia that borders Alabama. This is a country that borders Russia that's called Georgia. So we've got Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. Say that after me. Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. All right. Moving to the Central Asian republics, we have 5 countries. And I should note that all of these countries were once part of the Soviet Union, the USSR. So Central Asian republics. Here, the largest of these 5 is Kazakhstan. Next, we have Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. So say those with me after me. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. Now's about a good time to pause for some viewer questions, and I can anticipate the first one that you have. So question number 1, what's with all the stands? I know that you heard it, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan. Well, the stan is a Persian word for homeland. So in the Persian language, they would attach that to an ethnic group location. So Kazakhstan would literally mean homeland of the Kazakh people. So I hope that answers that question. So question number 2. Some of you astute students, you're very observant students, may have noticed there's something with a little piece of land near the Baltic Sea. Did you pick up on it? There's a map, and we can zoom into that. Here's Russia, and it's colored the same color as Russia, so that must mean it's part of Russia. You're absolutely right. If you notice that, then good for you. This is Kaliningrad. Kaliningrad is a Russia exclave. Now, an exclave is a part of a country that is not part of its contiguous borders. If you think about our own United States, we have an exclave, don't we? We have Alaska that is not part of our rest of our borders. So this is Kaliningrad, that is part of Russia, and it has a very important port there on the Baltic Sea. So a last question for viewers, question number 3, what actually divides Russia and Asia? Have you ever wondered that? Well, the answer, generally speaking, is the Ural Mountains and the Caucasus Mountains. This map shows Russia and how Russia has part of it on the west side of the Ural Mountains, but most of Russia is found east of the Ural Mountains. Okay, so in the green, you've got European Russia. Okay, the Ural Mountains run right along here, and anything east of that is going to be considered the Asian part of Russia. In addition to the Ural Mountains, there's also a mountain range called the Caucasus Mountains. And if you remember, we had those 3 nations that are found in this area, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. They're named the Caucasus republics because they're found in the Caucasus Mountains. Let's take a look now at a physical map of Russia and the Eurasian republics. Remember that physical maps, we can see a lot about what the terrain and the landforms are like. We can look at the bodies of water and other things. So first, let's notice that Russia is bordered in the north by the Arctic Ocean. It doesn't have a natural border of high land, so it gets those cold Arctic winds. On the east, it's bordered by the Pacific Ocean and the Bering Sea up in the top northeast. That's very close to our country, and it's very close to Alaska. We can see that there are lots of rivers in Russia. The longest in this region is the Volga River. We can see Lake Baikal, which is the deepest freshwater lake in the world. We can take a look at the elevation. Let's look at our elevation in the map key. Elevation is the height of the land above sea level. So in the areas where you see the greens, that means that it's 0 to 500 feet above sea level. Relatively flat land. But when you start to get into the oranges and the reds, that's when you know that you're really getting into some mountainous region or plateau region. And we can see that there's quite a bit of that in the southeast where the Central Asian republics are, right there on the border of China. Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan have some high elevation. Along Russia's southern border with Mongolia and China, you've got some high elevation. The lowland areas are generally in the European side of Russia. You've got the northern European plain and the West Siberian plain. They're really only interrupted by the Ural Mountains. If you can imagine, with all that flat, low-lying land, that's probably going to be good for what? Did you guess farming? You're absolutely right. Okay? With all of these rivers giving irrigation and all of this flat land, this is where most of the farming happens. However, to the east, okay, central Russia and eastern Russia, all of that expanse is Siberia. And if you know anything about Siberia, it's cold and not very hospitable to humans, okay? So let's take a look at some visual vocabulary. Some things about this region. The tundra. This is flat land found in the Arctic and subarctic regions. And this is what you're going to find in Russia's Siberia and extreme northern regions. This is a place where very few plants can grow. Another visual vocabulary is permafrost. Now think about that word, permafrost. Sounds like permanently frozen, and that's exactly what it is. This makes up about 50% of Russia's land, and if something is frozen, then it's not going to be very conducive or good for farming or mining or drilling or construction. So some of that land basically is not used for anything. We also have Siberia, which I mentioned. This is that vast region in central and eastern Russia with harsh climates, remote locations. However, they do have a wealth of natural resources that largely remain inaccessible because of how far out they are and how hard it is to get to them. I will mention, though, that the Trans-Siberian Railroad helped connect Russia across the large expanse. If you've studied 7th grade science, you may remember from your biomes that the taiga region is a vast forested area that's south of the tundra. This stretches for thousands of miles, and these trees that are found here are very valuable timber resources. And then we have the steppe region. These are low-lying plains, large expanses of relatively flat land, and they tend to be good for grazing and agriculture. Next, I'd like for you to look at a thematic map that is focused on the natural resources that are found in this region. Looking at this map, you can see that there are a number of natural resources for this region. They're very plentiful. Oil, natural gas, coal, and peat are all non-renewable fossil fuels that are plentiful in this region, and they contribute a lot to the economies of these nations. As well, 20% of the world's iron ore, which is used for making iron and steel, can be found here. Notice, however, the area of Siberia. Do you see many things out there? Okay, I don't see very many things, but I'm not sure that that means that they're not there. So a question for you. Physical geography impacts. How might the size and the climate of this region impact human settlement in daily life? Think about that for a moment. It probably helps to think about it in terms of where would you want to live. Few people probably would want to live in Siberia. Economic activity is probably going to be focused on areas west of the Ural Mountains, the manufacturing, the farming, the mining, the drilling that happens. We can also look at a population density map to see how this plays out. On this map, a red dot equals 50,000 people. So let's look at where we see the concentration of the red color. And it looks like it's in the western and southern parts of Russia, and that would indicate the larger cities, the urban areas. When you compare that to Siberia, out in central and eastern Russia, you really don't see a lot of red, do you? That's not to say that people don't live there, but they're fewer and further between. Remember, population density is how closely packed are the people. Let's take a look at this question. Consider how the population density differs on either side of the Ural Mountains. What physical features might contribute to this population distribution? So remember what we said. The Ural Mountains run on the western side of Russia. It looks like most of the people live west of those. And that's exactly right. The plains, the North European plain, and the lower elevations there contribute to the denser population that we see compared to that is east of the Ural Mountains in Siberia. It wouldn't be social studies if we didn't look at some data, so let's do that. Let's look at this table. And first of all, what's being shown here? Well, it looks to me like we have a list of countries with land area and population. And the focus is going to be Russia and the Eurasian republics. So my second question to you is, why is the U.S. included? If you look down at the very bottom, you'll see that the United States' land area and population is included. And that's just to give you a frame of reference. Who's the source? Number 3, if you look down at the far bottom, it's the CIA World Factbook, which is a reputable source. This table is organized. You might think, well, they started with the largest country, but they did start with Russia, but then after that, the countries are in alphabetical order. So how did the countries compare? Well, we can look and see in terms of land area, the largest country is naturally Russia, And then beyond that, we've got the United States and then Kazakhstan. We can also compare them on population. Of all of these countries that we've talked about, which one has the largest population? Okay, Russia does, with 139 million people. But compare that to the United States. And in 2010, the population of the United States was 310 million people. One question is, what can this data help us understand? Well, we can look at this in terms of land area and population, and remember, wait a second, population density is calculated by taking population and dividing it by land area. Okay, so that helps us be able to compare countries in terms of their population density. If you look at Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, both of those countries have very similar land areas. But then look at the population, and you'll see that Uzbekistan has a much larger population and therefore a much greater population density than Turkmenistan does. So let's do a few comprehension questions. Which of these statements does not reflect the population patterns illustrated in this region? The first, Russia is sparsely populated, meaning not very populated. B, Siberia is sparsely populated. C, more Russians live on the European side of Russia than on the Asian side. And D, there are fewer large cities on the Asian side of Russia than on the European side. Well, if you've been listening and you've chosen answer choice A, then you're correct. The next question, where are the republics of Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan located? Do you remember where they were? Your answer choices: Central Asia, North European Plain, Caucasus Mountains, Siberia, or Kamchatka Peninsula. And if you chose the Caucasus Mountains, you're correct. Finally, Russia, along with all of the countries in this region, were part of the Soviet Union, or USSR, until it dissolved in 1991. What's the best meaning of the word dissolved used here? Does it mean aligned together or united with other countries? Does it mean vanished with no trace, broken apart, or figured out a problem? In this sense, we've got a couple of clues that tell us that this is past tense. They were part of something, but they're no longer. So the best answer is D. Have you learned something today? Have you learned some locations of some countries? I sure hope so. Let's review. We've got Russia, we've got Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. We've got the Central Asian countries of Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. And have we been able to answer this essential question? How does the physical geography impact life in this region? Think about that for a moment. We can look at Russia's size and its extreme climates. They have shaped life there. They determine where people live, what natural resources can be extracted from the ground, where the farming happens, and much more. Because of its land stays permanently frozen with very short growing seasons, much of its core activities take place west of the Ural Mountains. And Central Asia is very isolated from its neighbors with deserts and mountains. I would like to encourage you to take a look at a case study of the Aral Sea. If you've got the packets and you're following along at home, then I want you to consider one of our geography themes is human-environmental interaction. And take a look at this picture. Once the fourth largest lake in the world, now looks like this, with camels and ships or a boat that's sitting on dry land. What could have happened here? That's the mystery that I want you to solve. Read the case study and learn what happened to what was once the fourth largest lake in the world on the left, back in the 1970s, now looks like this on the right. Can you find the answer? Well, I hope you can, and let me give you a spoiler alert. This is man-made disaster. Humans did this. So I hope that you will be encouraged to learn more about the Aral Sea and about this region. I hope you've learned something today. For my students, I'd like to tell you I miss you beyond, you can't believe how much I miss you. And to my colleagues, you're working hard. Keep doing it. We're in this together. Parents, thank you for what you're doing. And for all of those who are keeping us safe and keeping life as we know it, thank you for what you do. Join us next week. Thank you.